There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my Maine turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today in the show, I am joined by legendary big woods tracker Hal Blood to recap my recent hunt in Maine and the lessons I learned about tracking deer in the snow. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And today's episode is one that I have been wanting to share for a long time. This has been a story I've hoped I would get to experience and hoped I'd get to share someday for years now. I've talked about going up to Maine or somewhere in the Northeast and trying to track down deer in the snow, right? This whole idea of finding a big track and walking it down over miles and miles of big woods terrain. It just seemed like one of the coolest ways to hunt ever. I think for 2 or 3 years, I've been saying, hey, this year I'm going to do it. And then it fell through. And then the next year I'm like, okay, this is the year I'm going to do it. And then it fell through. Well, finally, in 2021, it actually happened. I did it. I've had this experience, and today I want to share that story with you, as well as everything I learned about how to do it. And to help me do it is Hal Blood. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast this fall, you probably have an idea of what I've been doing and why I went and visited with somebody like Hal Blood, but let me give you the real quick recap. My season this year has been mostly devoted to traveling across the country to hunt in brand new places in brand new ways. And I've been meeting with a local expert in each place to figure out what it is they do. So in this case, I met up with Hal Blood in Maine, and I wanted Hal to show me how he tracks deer down in the snow. So we met up, spent a day together. I followed in his footsteps, asking him 1,000 questions, basically doing a podcast in person while we're out there doing the thing. So I got to see exactly how he tries to track down deer in the snow. And then after that day together, I was going to head out on my own and try to see if I could put it into action, guinea pig these ideas, and pull off this kind of hunt myself. So that's what I tried to do back towards the third week of November, I think it was. That's when I did it. And man, without giving away too much, I will tell you this. It was a hell of an experience. I mean, learned a ton, got to spend some really fun days in beautiful country, and in short, I'm definitely going to be using these new tactics in the future. So we've got Hal here on the show in just a couple minutes. Hal's going to help us walk through everything we did, share a lot of insight and strategies and tactics that anyone listening to this will be able to use and put into action in your own neck of the woods. If you have big woods terrain like this, if you have snow like this, I think you'll be able to learn a lot. I've also got my 2 cameramen who were following me around, capturing all of this for our new show. So we've got Dylan Lenz and Jimmy Michaels, who will be able to add some different perspectives, some context, some color, and fact check me on anything if I miss something. So that's the game plan. Hope you guys enjoy this one. I certainly did. Let's get into my chat with Hal Blood, one of the absolute legends in the big woods deer tracking world, a registered Maine guide, and one of the best out there. You can also learn more about him. We'll make sure to talk about this at the end, but I want to say at the beginning too, he's the host of the Big Woods Bucks podcast, YouTube series. He's got classes. He books guided hunts. He does it all. So if you like what you hear today, there's definitely more out there. So now, for real, without further ado, my chat with Hal, Dylan, and Jimmy. All right, now with me on the line to discuss this pretty epic trip, we've got Hal Blood, Dylan Lenz, and Jimmy Michaels, or Jimmer, as we like to call him. And rather than doing like the 4 people kind of beating around the bush and saying, hey, it's good to be here, and people talking over each other, I'm just going to skip that part. And I want to jump just right into the really good stuff, because there's a lot to talk about on this this expedition of sorts. As you 3 already know, and as people listening heard just a little bit about as I introduced this whole idea, the gist of what we were hoping to do on this trip was to come and meet up with you, Hal, spend a day, learn about what you do and how you do it when it comes to tracking deer, and then, take everything I learned from that day and then go out on my own for 3 more days and try to pull it off myself. That was the hope and the dream, showing up in Maine, praying for snow and hoping we could do this thing. Now, where I want to start, Hal, is what you were thinking about leading into the trip, because we kind of told you, hey, this is our dream, this is our idea, this is what we'd like to do. Would you help us out? And you were so kind as to agree. But when you looked at the forecast coming up as we were about to get there, when you were out there hunting yourself in those days leading up to it, how were you feeling about things? What were you thinking about our chances and how we were actually going to pull this off when maybe conditions it seemed like they were a little less than ideal, right?
Yeah, a lot less than ideal. That's really the gist of it. But I was actually, even before that week, I was thinking that, when you talked about, the limited time you had, that makes it tough anyways. Because I tell people, to be fair to yourself, coming up here, a week is a good start. Because most people, they get a week maybe to go on a hunt or whatever. But in reality, up in this country, you owe it to yourself to take 2 weeks straight ahead to have, a decent chance of, killing a buck, or even a decent chance of having a few days with good conditions, because that's a reality. I mean, you can have snow, but that doesn't mean it's good tracking snow. And, you've seen some of that. We had a little snow, but it wasn't nowhere near ideal. So, and those are days that's, it's a lot harder to kill a buck on days like that. So that was my first thought, was really it isn't much time to try to, really have a good chance at it. But we knew we had to try it anyway. So, and then when I saw the conditions, I mean, we had pretty dismal conditions the whole season until the end of Thanksgiving week. We finally got a nice shot of snow kind of everywhere, and it made our muzzleloader season week a pretty good week. But going into that week, there was only snow in like some of the higher elevations along the borders and, places like that. So I had to go try to find a place to take you, because what happens when we get those type of conditions with limited snow, it kind of crowds people to those places. In other words, if you got 2 or 3 mountains that's got snow halfway up them, well, they're going to have 10 times the hunting pressure because people come up here, they want to get on snow, so they all run to them mountains. So I don't like to hunt those places like that, when there's other people around. So I went and looked for a place we could go where I felt we probably wouldn't have anybody else around, and we didn't. And I took a chance on a place, and sometimes it gets some of that early snow and sometimes it doesn't. But fortunately, it had some, which made it, at least we could follow tracks. I can say that way. We could follow tracks.
Yeah. Now, you talked about how even though we were able to find some snow, you still didn't feel like it was ideal. For this kind of hunt, like, what's the absolute ideal situation? If you could paint the perfect scenario when it came to the conditions, what would that have been?
Well, really nice conditions are when you get several inches of snow anyways, that covers the ground enough to make it quiet. So if you get, and it depends if it's wet snow, damp snow, or dry, fluffy snow, it takes more of the dry snow to do that than the damp snow, because underneath you got all kinds of sticks in the woods. And this, of course, obviously the snow covers the sticks, so you can't see them, so you're going to be stepping on a lot of them. So you need enough snow to kind of muffle those sounds. And, if it's wet snow, a couple inches will help because the sticks are damp and they don't make as much noise. But dry snow, it's more like 4 to 6 inches. If you get 4 to 6 inches, it really quiets the woods down. If it's hanging in the trees, it muffles the sound. The sound doesn't carry through the woods like it would on days when there's no snow on the limbs or clear, crisp days. And so that's kind of it. It's got to be quiet because, one of them, a deer can hear you for 100 yards, if not, so it's just trying to get near one is difficult, And the other part that makes it ideal, especially if you have marginal snow, just a little snow, or it's more noisy or something, is wind. So I call, if we get a couple inches of snow and we got a nice wind where the trees are swaying a little and there's leaves are rattling around, with the dead leaves on the trees, and I call those are the buck killing days right there, because that is taking away the advantage that a buck has, because obviously they can hear better than us. They can smell, and they can, not that they see great if you don't move, but they pick up movement probably quicker than we do. So the wind takes care of all of that, because if the trees are moving and the leaves are shaking, that puts some movement in the woods so they don't pick up on your movement as quick. The wind and the things rattling around helps cover your noise, and it also makes it so your scent's not going to get anywhere. If it's a windy day, your scent don't probably get 10 feet from you. So that's ideal conditions. That's how you have to paint it out for an ideal day. Well, like I said, a buck killing day. And quite frankly, you don't get very many of those days in a season. Even in a season when there is snow, you don't have those ideal conditions that often.
Yeah, and we never really had quite that set of conditions in the 4 days we had. Another thing, though, that I imagine you thought was not ideal, but what did you think when we showed up for day one and you realized there was going to be 4 of us trying to do this all together? So you, me, and 2 cameramen. What did you think about that as far as our chances?
I thought we were just going to be taking a walk in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a leisurely stroll.
Definitely not ideal on that front. So speaking of the cameramen, Jimmer, Dylan, when we showed up in Maine and you got to see the area we were going to be hiking around in, what were you thinking about this hunt? What were your thoughts kind of preliminarily? Jimmy, if you want to start, about our chances, about what you thought about what we were getting ourselves into. What was your take?
Well, growing up in the Midwest, I'm very used to more posting, waiting for the deer to come to us. This was brand new, having to stalk a deer, basically looking for the tracks and then going after it. I honestly didn't know what to expect. I was somewhat familiar with terrain in Maine, but not exactly where we were going.
Yeah. What about you, Dylan?
It was beautiful showing up there and, hoping we would get more snow, but, having to work with the conditions we had made it tougher, obviously, but just, the idea of stalking a whitetail and then adding a camera person or two camera people, right, just made it seem like a colossal feat coming into it. This was the first time I've ever done a spot and stalk whitetail hunt, to try and film it. Usually if you're doing it for mule deer or something like that, you have a lot of terrain to play with where, you can hide your sound and your sight a lot better. So just coming into it just seemed like a daunting task, but it was pretty exciting to be there.
Mm-hmm. And you're right, Dylan. It was just beautiful, especially that first day. Like we showed up at night, the first night, and I don't think there was any snow down at camp, but we were hoping, and Hal, you told us that there was a chance that, there should still be snow up to this other area where you had been walking around the previous couple of days. And we showed up there that first morning and it started to get the light out and we could see that, yes, in fact, there was some snow and you could see the rolling hills and the big timber. And it was everything as advertised. It was what you dream of when you think of going up into the woods of Maine. Just as a beautiful, beautiful first day. But one thing, that was interesting to me, Hal, was the fact that, you chose to drive right to a place and start hiking. Before we found any tracks. I've talked to some people in the past that prefer driving around until they find tracks crossing a road and then go from there. Can you talk about your preference between, driving back roads till you find a track versus hiking to find a track, and what the pros and cons of would be either approach?
Yeah, what I tell people is for every buck track you see cross a road, there's 10 more that didn't cross a road. So your odds of picking up a track in the woods are basically 10 times better, right? So that's why I do that. I mean, just riding around randomly, and for one thing, you got to remember is you got 100 other people doing the same thing on most of the roads. There's people that's all they do. So your odds of getting a track anyway, unless some of these guys, it's like off to the races in the morning, It's who gets there the earliest. They're driving around, some guys at 4:00 in the morning, a good 2 hours or more before daylight, looking for a track. And, then if they find one, they camp out on it, I guess. But that makes a long day trying to do that. And, even if you do find one. So I just never do that. I can almost always find a good big track that I want to be on in the woods. I very rarely find one of those good big ones from the road. It's an absolute bonus if I do. And if I do, it's just usually because I found one on the way to where I was going to go anyway. So my plan in the morning is to get where I want to be at daylight and head in the woods. So I'll be driving. I might drive 20 minutes from my house, or I might drive an hour, but I just plan on being there at daylight, and I'll check for tracks on the way. If I see a track in the road, I'll get out and size it up. And it's like I said, it's a bonus if I find one from the road that I want to take, a big enough one that I want to take. So the only advantage I could see of driving and finding a track driving, there's no advantage because your odds are a lot less even finding one. But the one thing is, if you do, you're fresh when you get on it, because I might walk half the day sometimes finding a track. Well, I've put on 5, 6, 7 miles already. So, I'm not that fresh when I get on it to start with, and so it makes it a harder job to try to catch up to that buck, So, but that's the only advantage I could see, is that you'd be fresh when you got on it.
Yep.
And maybe you could be fresh, but you might not be in shape, because I think the guys that go ride the trucks all day long looking for tracks, they don't get any exercise, so they're not ready for the task anyway,
Right.
Yeah, that was definitely shocking for me. I definitely thought we were going to be spending a lot more time driving roads in the truck, and then for day one, I think we put on 8, 9 miles or.
Yeah, it was I think 9 3/4 miles is what we got.
Readjust my expectations.
Yeah. So, Hal, one of the things I was curious about when I started taking off on my own and was interested in when you started on that first day with us was just how you plan the route you're going to take. So you're going in blind to a place. We haven't found a track yet. You picked a destination where you wanted to park your truck, and then you said, all right, we're going to take a hike and hope we cross a track. How do you plan a route? How do you think through where you should go walking around to hopefully pick up a track?
I always plan my routes around like a big circle. Whether I'm still hunting a track, no matter what I'm doing, I make a big circle for the day. I don't say I'm going to circle here for an hour and try something else. Once in a while, I'll go in and I'll say I'll spend a half a day in this spot because that's the size it is, where I think I can find a track. But it's usually an all-day thing. I'll start out for the day, and I'll just walk a huge circle, which might be a 10-mile circle. And it usually consists of either side of a mountain, all the way around a mountain, or maybe it's not a mountain, maybe it's just ridges. But I just kind of want to circle a big area where I think a buck might be coming and going from to get to the does. Because during our deer season in November, that's basically what they're up to, is checking on them does, whether it's just before the rut when we start or during the rut. Their travel patterns are affected by where the does are located. So that's what I do. I just make a big circle for the day.
Okay. And I remember that first spot we started, we kind of walked up a old logging road that I think was going to take us up towards this ridge. And then, like you said, you'd mentioned that we'll just kind of walk a big loop up around this area, but it didn't take too terribly long. And we started walking, and within less than 100 yards, we saw some fawn tracks. And then there was a bigger track, but a pretty old one. And then, I don't know, within a half hour of walking, I think maybe, we came upon a track that, you thought was interesting. But there was one thing that I was curious about before we got to that point. And it was the fact that we were cruising. I mean, we were hiking through the woods fast. We were making noise. And I remember asking you, Hal, do we need to be more quiet? Do you want us to be, should we be in stealth mode, or do we just ram through the woods like this, not caring? And you gave me your perspective there, but could you tell us now, what's your take on when you're searching for a track? Do you worry about making noise, or do you just cover ground?
No, I just cover ground. If you're worried about making noise, you can't cover as much ground. So I'm not worried about making noise until I think I'm near a deer anyway. So there's a lot of space between the deer up in this country, so I don't worry about it.
Okay. So then we did find that track then. We were going fast, we were making a racket, we found a track, and you took a look at it. You kind of walked off the side of the trail, looked at a couple tracks, and you said, I think this one's good enough. That moment, this part of the hunt, was one that I was most interested in, maybe of all, which is like the analysis of a track. when you were looking at that track, can you walk me through? I guess this is an interesting. What do you look at first? Do you look at size? Do you try to determine, like, is this a big enough deer first, or do you look at, is this a fresh enough track first? What's the first thing you study before you then advance to the next question?
Well, it's probably a combination. I mean, it depends if it's a new snow, like if the snow's only been made that day or the day before in the night. To me, it is a fresh track. So I'm gonna size it up, but basically it's got to be, I like even if it's a big track, I'm gonna look at it and maybe think about how old it has to be for I'm not going to take it, which is usually 2 days old. If it's made 2 nights before, I won't take it. I call a fresh track a track that's made in the night, the previous night. So I'm looking in the morning. And if it was made sometime in the night, whether it's 4 hours old or 12 hours old, to me, it's still a fresh track. And most of the time I can catch that buck that day. Most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a fresh track. And then I look for the size, and I'm more particular than most people. So if the people that are listening don't try to go by my expectation of a size of a track, because you'll get discouraged, because obviously the big old tracks made by the big old bucks, and they're the smartest ones to try to kill, and that's not the way to begin. You got to begin on a younger buck maybe to get some experience with it. But I look for tracks here in our deer are the northern borealis, and they have the biggest feet than any of the other whitetail species. So, they are big feet on them. So I'm looking for a track I call them a 3x3, 3 inches wide by 3 inches long, but they're never square like that. They usually, if they're 3 inches wide, they're usually at least 3.5 long. Some of them 4. I have seen them 4.5. So that's the tracks I'm looking for, and they got to be toes. Yeah, got to be round.
Neat, you
Go ahead, Dylan.
You took out of your pocket. You just grabbed I think it was like a lip balm, canister. You just threw that in the track real quick, like big enough deer. I just, if you're, us new to this area, just looking at tracks, like a foreign language, and you basically just read them like, yep, this is a big deer, let's follow it.
Yeah, well, I've seen thousands of them, and I've studied thousands of them, and I've followed thousands of them. So it's pretty easy to see right off. So it's, like I said, it's the size and the shape. A lot of the shape is, like I said, that I want to see that the toes are rounded, because those are the old bucks. The pointed-toed bucks aren't old usually, unless it's a huge buck that maybe doesn't, I've seen the ones that they're more, I guess people might call them swamp bucks, but they just live in areas where it's not rugged footing, it's not rocks and stuff in the ridges and ledges that wear their feet. They may have a little more pointed toe, but generally those toes are going to be rounded off by the time they get, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're going to be round. And then the other thing that happens with them, with their feet, is the toes won't go together anymore. In other words, the print won't be like a heart-shaped print. There's going to be a space in between the two toes. And the bigger that space is usually an indication of the older bucks. And I've seen that space between them just in a normal walk be almost an inch. Those are huge bucks, and it's because their feet are wearing out, they're sprung out, the tendons are stretched or whatever it is, and they just don't go back together. So those are the ones I call square-toed bucks, because when you look in the print itself looks square instead of pointed, because them two toes are sticking straight ahead. And that's the back feet, which when you look at a track of a buck, it's just walking a normal walk. You're looking at the rear. The clear print you see is the back foot, because they, like any of those animals like that, they step for step back foot into their front feet when they walk. So you're not getting a clear picture of their front foot, which is bigger. The front feet are bigger than the back feet on any of the deer. You look at them, the moose are the same way. You take the feet and compare them, and the front feet are much bigger. So the back foot is smaller, so when you're looking at that, you always keep that in mind, that you're looking at the smaller of the feet anyway. And when you see that is really big, then you get a look at the front foot, like he stops to feed or turn or do something. When he sticks a front foot out there, you're going to see how much bigger those feet are, you know.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Now, what about for someone who's trying to do this for the first time, like I was? How would you go about identifying the track of a beginner buck, let's call it, a younger buck? What does that kind of track look like, and how do you differentiate that from a doe?
Well, for a new person, it's going to be hard to differentiate from a doe, because like a yearling buck, his dew claws aren't pronounced as much yet. So I just tell people, when you're new at it, if the track is by itself, and it's, as long as it's not a tiny track like those fawn tracks we saw, but if it's a regular sized deer track and it's by itself, just follow it, because what you're doing is you're practicing anyways. And if you get a look at it and it's a doe, at least you've accomplished part of what you set out to do. You tracked a deer and saw it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting some practice. It might be a yearling buck. It might be a spike horn, crotch horn, little 6-pointer, whatever it is. If a new person, if he caught up to one of those and could shoot it, it's a big accomplishment. You've done something that 90% of the hunters can't do or wouldn't do or haven't done. So that's how you get started when you do. Like I said, you don't start out trying to take the biggest track in the woods. I mean, I'm not saying don't take it if you find it, but don't walk around and whatever all day long, just looking for the great biggest track. And sometimes them other tracks take you to a big track. So if you're on a average size track, you might come across the bigger one, and you can always switch off onto that one, you know?
Yeah, that made sense to me.
Yeah, it's how a day unfolds, you know. As you go along throughout a day, strange things happen, the day unfolds, and you never know what's going to happen when you're following a buck, you know. You don't know where he's going to take you. You don't know what he's going to do, but at least he's showing you all that stuff. That's the fun part about tracking is I call it, you live in the life of that buck. You're getting to see exactly what that buck did. It's written in the snow for you. Where he went, what he did, if he checked does, if he fed, if he laid down, you get to figure out all the things about what he did and try to figure out why he did them, you know?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things, was just seeing that story written in the snow. And it's kind of like pulling a curtain back, and you get to see behind the scenes of what these deer actually do. That was fascinating. The whole week, getting to walk in the footprints of a deer and see that world was really cool. Now, one of the things though that I found toughest to figure out was understanding how fresh was fresh enough. Like when I eventually went off on my own, that was something I kept coming back to. I'd look at a track and like, man, was this last night? Was this yesterday? Like that different. I could tell what was like really old, and I could tell what was really fresh. But there was this like middle ground where I would be back and forth, hemming and hawing on it. And you had talked about when we crossed that first track, you said you want a crispy track. Can you describe again for us what that means? Like what a crispy track looks like in your eyes, and then walk us through anything else that helps you determine that a track is fresh enough to go on? Because this is easier said than done, I think.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. Aging a track is the hardest part of tracking. Whether you're trying to age one that's made last night or the night before, or you might be trying to age one that's 15 minutes old instead of 2 hours old, you know. That's the hardest part of tracking, and that's just takes experience. I can tell you what it looks like to me, but I guarantee it ain't going to look like that to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you have to personally see enough of them to get that information into your brain. But a crispy track to me, well, first of all, the track changes. Track in the snow changes immediately after it's made. It's doing two things. It's either melting if it's above 32, or it's freezing if it's below 32. And if it's right at 32, that's the only time that it stays the same for a long time. So either side of that, the track is changing. And usually, once the snow's on the ground, most of the time it's freezing. You know, it's below that 32-degree mark. Snow's not melting or whatever. And when the track is first made, there'll be dust, you know, there'll be snow kicked or pushed up in front of it, you know, as they drag their feet along or whatever. There's snow, say it's powdery snow, and it's fluffed out in the front. And that's why I call it crispy, because it looks like it just happened. Looks like you just threw some sugar on the floor or something, you know, and it hasn't changed yet. You know, it hasn't had time to, when I say freezing, it's really, it's evaporating. Like if you have one of the, you know, all the freezers now are like frost free, you know, if you got your ice box in your refrigerator, if you leave your ice cubes in the ice tray so long, what happens to them? They disappear, don't they? If you left them in there for a long time, because they evaporated away. Well, the same thing happens in the snow, but it actually happens quicker in snow than it does in solid ice. So it'll start to round out, like the edge where it steps through the snow. When it's fresh, that edge will be real sharp, like real sharp edge. And then it's going to start withering or blending in, freezing and just rounding over kind of. And it's subtle. It's not like you're going to see it immediately. It's really subtle. And then it's a different length of time if it's 20 degrees or from if it's 0 degrees. So it's almost like you've got to have a slide rule or something and calculate that out. But you have to do it in your mind, and it's through experience. And that's the only way you can do it, is gain that experience. So in the beginning, I guess you're going to guess quite a bit. So
yeah.
The other way you can tell a little bit closer is if it steps in the wet ground, even if it's frozen and the snow's powder and it's frozen ground. There's a lot of, in this woods here, there's a lot of wet ground in the woods, so in little trickles, and they step in the water, wet ground, you'll see how much the ice is made in the track. There might be water in the track. How frozen is it? Is it a half an inch thick? Is it a 16th of an inch thick, and then guess by the temperature how old it might be. It's just a guess anyways in the beginning. You're just trying to think about it, but that's just the thing you have to do.
Yeah. And like you said, it seems like just reps seems to be the most important thing, because when I was starting, I realized real quickly that I'd never paid this much attention to a track, just to a snowy track before. So I just didn't have a set of I didn't have a context to compare one to. So I was looking at a track and I'm thinking, man, this certainly seems fresh compared to the other things we've seen today, but I don't have a whole catalog of tracks I can look back through over years and think to myself, okay, I saw this one and confirmed it was a deer that was there that day, and I saw this kind of track and this ended up being a deer that was right in front of me, and I didn't have that experience base to look back on. So to your point, just guessing. It was guessing and hoping, and then walking it down and seeing if I was right or not.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst thing that can happen is you were wrong and it was 2 days old, but it took you to a fresher one, or you were right and you went 200 yards and you jumped it. You know what I mean? It's at least you're getting started somewhere, right?
Yeah. Now, when we found that track, you determined that it was big enough and it was fresh enough to go on. And then we started cruising. And one of the first things you told me was you don't want to be an Elmer Fudd. Can you expand on that? Can you talk to me a little bit about how fast you go once you get on a track, and how you determine when you should be going fast versus when you should slow down?
Yeah, so usually when you get on a track, you very rarely get on one that's like fresh, like within an hour. You know what I mean? That's, if you do, it's like hitting the lottery kind of, But I just go along and read the track. See, I'm immediately when I get on that buck, I'm trying to figure out what he's up to. So if he's just walking along steady, I got to walk along steady, and I got to walk fast, because you can't walk as fast as a buck can walk. So if you ain't walking fast, you're still losing ground. So you got to try to gain ground. And usually the way you gain ground is when he stops to do something, whether he stops to feed, he stops to check on some does, make a scrape, rub, lay down, whatever he did to stop. That's the only time you're really gaining any time on a buck. You're not gaining time other than that. So you got to move along, or you'll never catch up anyway. Unless he happened to lay down, you got lucky that way. But you got to plan on gaining on the buck so you can get to where he is and hunt him, And if that means jumping him out of his bed, bumped him because you was moving too fast, so be it. At least now you're right behind him, and you can hunt now. If you Elmer Fudd, that's kind of just a cartoon, but you always saw Elmer Fudd. He'd have both hands on his gun, and he'd be going along very, very quiet. And if you do that in the beginning, when you first get on one that's made sometimes in the night, might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 hours old, you're probably never going to even get anywhere near that buck, because that buck could be 5, 7, 8 miles from you when you get started. So you got to make up that ground.
Now, that brings to mind the next thing, which is you're cruising, and that's what we did. We did a whole bunch of hiking. We followed this track. It took us up a big ridge. It spun around. It was on some does. It seemed like it started going back down the ridge. It made kind of a wide loop. It dropped down back towards where we actually had started hiking originally, and you were wondering, man, is he going to circle back right over our tracks? And then he turned again, and he started going up a ridge, up to the top of a knob of sorts. And at this point, you said, all right, this buck is doing a textbook thing. We need to slow down. Can you describe, Hal, kind of what that was that made you want to slow down, and what are all the things, or what are the different things that would make you say, okay, it's time to shift into a new gear. Let's drop it down. Let's creep. Now we need to be in sneaky mode. What makes you shift into that part of the hunt?
Well, that's if I think he's laying down usually. And the main indication if he's laying down is usually that he fed, because usually they're going to feed before they take the time to lay down. So that's the number one indication, which that buck had done a little bit of it, not a lot, which is, it's not unusual for a buck not to feed a lot during the rut. And this was, when you came, it was, probably right during the biggest part of the rut, or when it was really getting going. So that buck had fed a little bit here and there, was following does around, checking on them, and didn't get hooked up with one. And then when he went down, and then he kind of went along this hardwood ridge and abruptly turned and went right up a steep ridge. And that's usually what they do when they're going to lay down, so they can look down to where they've been, on their backtrack. That's just classic, is most of them bucks are always going to be looking back where they came from. There's something following them. And up here in this woods, they've been conditioned through being chased by coyotes. So that's their only real natural predator. I mean, the bears will eat the fawns and stuff there, but they're not chasing them around in the woods, a buck or anything. So they learn to watch for a coyote coming behind them or something. So they're always watching back. So when they do that, usually, quite often when they do it, it's already too late. By the time you get to where they turned and went up the ridge, they've already seen you and they're gone. But not always. Sometimes they'll get up over the crest where they can't see over, and maybe they feed a little there and lay down, and you might happen to catch them or whatever. But that's why we slowed down. I thought probably he was going to be up there. And again, it was in one of them places that wasn't much else we could do about it, but just kind of ease up there and see. So we eased up slowly up over that crest of that ridge, and he hadn't laid down. He was headed for another knob, a green knob, and then I thought he was probably in there. And so we eased over there, and he didn't stop there. We had already crossed his tracks, and I didn't pick up on it because it come out of that little green growth where there wasn't much snow. If you remember, there was, I don't know, it wasn't even an inch of snow. I don't think. It just about barely, the leaves were sticking up through it still. So he made a funny loop, just kind of circled around. He must have thought there was a doe in that spot, and he made that loop, and there wasn't. So then he just kept going. Remember, from then on, he just kind of got on a straightaway mission,
Mm-hmm. And he kept going along the edge of some water for ways, and then finally made his way into another thick kind of cedar or pine patch of some kind. I can't remember what it was. And we lost snow in there. Can you talk about what you do in that kind of situation? In this case, we just decided to pull the plug because we'd been going a long ways and we lost the track in there. But there were a couple other places where we had lost the track and you did some different things to try to pick it up again, or you tracked it in the mud. Can you just talk about the different ways you try to pick up a track again when you lose it in a spot like that?
Yeah, well, like I said, it was so marginal snow. If you remember, under the green trees, there was barely any anyway, because it catches up in the limbs. In the hardwoods, it gets down to the ground, but in the green trees, which up here is spruce and fir and cedar and stuff. But sometimes you get in these big patches that there's no snow underneath, and you just have to circle around. He had to come out of there, so you circle and pick up the track instead of trying to stare at the ground and see if you can see the track in the leaves or the needles or something. It's easier to walk right straight through the way you can see some snow and then pick it up there. But I knew when he headed down into that corner where it was all a big expanse of that green growth, I knew when he got down in there we were going to probably have trouble, because there was nothing to go by. It was that piece of woods there was probably a half a mile wide, probably at least a half a mile by a half a mile. And he headed into there and there's no way to see. You can't even, the ground in underneath those softwood trees, conifer trees, they don't even make a track. It's all just those needles from the 100 years worth of needles stacked up. Like it's just hard. It's not like leaves punched up where you can see the leaves curled up in the hardwoods. It's not like that. So once he got in there, I said, there's no way to try to figure out even where he's going in here. And the other part of it is so thick in there. If you remember, you couldn't see 20 feet most places.
Oh yeah.
You're not going to get him anyway. The only thing you can do, I don't give up on a buck that goes into that stuff. If there's snow where I can see where he went, I'll just jump him and push him out of there and try to get him somewhere else where I can get a look at him. But there just was no snow to do that. So we turned and went up, figuring maybe he just went in, searched around, and came back out again. So we just stayed in the hardwoods and ran the hardwood ridge above that green patch, hoping to find his track or another track,
Dylan, did you have a question?
So one thing that I'm just curious, Hal, when you're closing it in and you think that you're, actually, have a chance of spotting this deer, what are you imagining doing typically? Are you expecting to find him in his bed, or are you looking for him up and feeding? Are you just looking for antlers through the brush? I'm just curious to get in your head here and, imagine what you're expecting.
Well, I guess it depends what the buck is doing. If I know he's up on his feet, like I've already jumped him, or maybe sometimes you'll come to a bed and he just got up on his own and he's off again. I'm usually in that case, I'm expecting to see him on his feet, feeding, doing something. And if I expect that he's laying down, I play it a little different, because you've got to usually play it slower. If he just fed around a bunch and went in on this knoll or something like that, I'll go very, very slow, and I might just take a step and look all around, take one more step, scour around behind and around all the blowdowns, and I'm looking for an antler or an ear or a patch of brown or anything. If he's laying down, if he's up,
and are you?
Go ahead.
Are you catching these deer? Are you catching them unexpected? Are they ever, just doing their own thing, or are they typically onto you as you're closing the distance? Do they know something's after them?
Depends. Every situation's different. Depends how many times you've jumped them. If you've jumped them a few times, and they know something's behind them, and they're going to be looking all the time, and you just got to try to catch them in the right place at the right time and see him first. Or maybe, I don't care if he's standing there broadside chewing on a piece of stick or something. I'm not looking for that. I'm just looking to get a chance, a shot, whether it's he just took off and he's running. Doesn't make any difference to me. I just want to get that shot, obviously if he's standing there or something or laying down, it's going to be an easier shot. But when you get used to this type of hunting, a running shot is not a big deal to take,
Yeah, can you expand on that a little bit, Hal? Just, how you prepare yourself to take these shots that seem like almost always they're quick. It's a very short window of opportunity. When you get into, I think you called it your death creep, when you really think you're getting in close to one and you're slipping in real careful, how ready are you? Do you have are you holding the gun at the ready? Are you, what are the specifics you're doing, and what has helped you to improve your chances of being able to pull off a shot in such a little tight, narrow of time and sometimes tight space too?
Well, a lot of that is just practice and experience. And my practice, quite frankly, was when I started rabbit hunting with my grandfather, had beagles, and I started that when I was 10 years old and shot thousands of rabbits running. And they run like a deer kind of, they're bounding, The dogs are chasing them, and you just get experience doing that with your swing, you follow through, you're looking for the openings, and that's experience. So, but I was fortunate to grow up in that manner where I had that experience already going into it. Most people probably don't have that kind of an experience. So, but yeah, I go into it, if I think one's laying there and I'm going to get a look at it, or I think he's right here handy, my gun's in both hands ready to go. And my rule of thumb is like, if I can see him for 2 jumps, I'm probably going to get a shot, unless it's just too thick, Usually I get 2 jumps where I see him for 2 jumps. So if I see him make a jump, I can get my gun in action in 1 jump. And then I can usually get my shot off by the time he's made that 2nd jump. So yes, that's quick.
Yeah.
So, but it's just practice.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things that was most concerning for me, as I don't have that experience with running shots. I was kind of raised. My grandpa viewed that as something that I should not do. So I was like beat with a stick if I ever considered that, basically, metaphorically. So coming into this, I was thinking, man, how am I ever going to get a shot in this situation? That seemed like that was going to be the real crux. Like that was going to be something that would be particularly challenging if I ever made it to that point. But there's one other thing that we haven't touched on yet that was pretty important, it seemed like, which is, let's say you go into this death creep, you move into where you think he's bedded, and you do bump him, but you can't get the shot, and he goes running off before you see him or before you can get a shot off, whatever it might be. That buck runs off. You told us that this is one of the things that you do that a lot of people don't, that you think is particularly important, which is you take a sandwich break. Can you talk about your infamous sandwich breaks, why you do that, why that's important, what you're doing with that whole thing?
Yeah, so a long time ago, I learned through experience that I was just chasing bucks around all day because I'd jump them and keep right after them, and they're always looking back. And you come to a place where the track's standing there, turned around, looking back at you, and the track's running again. So I just thought that I had to outsmart them. I had to be a different thing to do. I could see that they were waiting. So, and 9 times out of 10 they do, but 1 out of 10 doesn't. But I always play the odds anyways. So I found that when I'd go right after them, I'd go maybe only 100 yards, maybe 300 yards, whatever it was at distance. And there would be tracks where the buck was standing there, turned around, facing back where he came from, kind of like treading around, kind of waiting. So I said, well, that's what they do. They're waiting to see if something's coming after them, so I'm not going to come after them. So I tried 15 minutes, and that didn't seem to work. So once I started waiting a half an hour, it seemed to work pretty well. And then that's one thing I wrote my first book. I had more people comment on that, more experienced hunters that have killed lots of bucks tracking and stuff, that they never thought of it. And I had a lot of people comment to me that's why they killed their first buck tracking, was because they waited. Because what happens is that buck usually, unless you out and out was in their face and really frightened them, that buck probably only heard a stick snap, maybe caught a little movement through the woods, through the limbs or something. He doesn't know what that is. He's just going to get out. He's not going to stay there. He's going to get out of the way and see what happens. And he might only go 100 yards and wait, 200, 300, 500. Doesn't matter. He's going to get off where he feels comfortable, and then he's going to wait and see if anything's following. Now, if you think about it, if a coyote's following him, usually that's going to be immediately. When they get chased by a coyote, the coyote's going to be running after them. So if that buck stands there for 15, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever, and nothing comes along, he just relaxes again. He's not afraid. He's kind of really basically forgot about that experience. There's something bothered him, and he's going to go about his business. Sometimes they lay right back down. Sometimes if it's later, like it's late morning, early afternoon, they won't lay down again. They'll just start going about their business because they've rested enough. They might start checking does, might start feeding, but whatever he's doing, he just starts doing it again. That's the best time to kill a buck. The first time laying in his bed's not the best time because he's looking back. He's hard to, it's the hardest time to get him. Those are the times, the only time you're probably going to get him that way is on one of those buck killing days where you've got some wind and maybe it's snowing and there's just some action going on where he's blind. And usually them kind of days, they don't want to run off as much because they feel vulnerable anyways because of the wind. So that second time, I've killed more bucks after I've jumped them than killed like when I jumped them or killed them laying in their beds in the beginning or something. So that's why I do it. The only exceptions I have to that is I only do it once, if it's the first time, and I make an exception if he's with a doe. If he's laying with a doe and they take off, I just ease right along after him because he's going to be distracted with her. Sometimes they get split up and he's going to try to get back with her or something. So I'll go right after them because he ain't thinking about looking back as much. She might be, but he's not.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I encountered something like that, and I guess I didn't think of that aspect of things. But But yeah, I guess I'll wait to dive into that until we start diving into that particular hunt a couple days later. I guess from that point, if we jump back into our day one, we didn't bump one. We tracked one forever. Then we walked and walked and walked after we lost that first track to try to find another one, and we never did find another one worth going on. We just cruised for a long time, and like Dylan said, we ended up covering almost 10 miles. I want to get Jimmer's perspective on that part of things. Just talk to me, Jimmer, about your thoughts on how Hal hikes through the woods, how fast he goes, how far he goes. Like, what did you learn about what it takes to walk a buck like this down after now spending a day following around one of the best in the business?
Oh gosh, even if I wasn't carrying a camera and a backpack full of camera gear, I still don't think I would have been able to keep up with Hal. That was impressive and inspirational. He knows what he's looking for. It's funny hearing you talk right now, Hal. It's like getting the cliff notes to a really big book. The big book is the actual hunt. You have to read the book. You have to go do the hunt. The cliff notes are all the things that you're telling us right now. And I think, like Mark was saying, he'll talk about here in a second, but everything you're saying we ran into. Even the looking at the prints, what direction are they going? Are they bedding down? Did we spook them? I mean, it's just from a camera guy's perspective, trying to tell the story visually, seeing all those things come together was truly fascinating. Having experienced it first day with you, and then we went off on our own for the next 3 days. But boy, covering that ground, I'm glad I had a couple of my own hunts in the month prior, and I felt like I was maybe in halfway decent shape, but still, kudos to you, Hal.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you kudos as well, Hal. You can put the pedal to the metal and you can walk a long ways. I consider myself one of the best long distance hiker and walkers in the mountains that I know and that I hang out with. And I think most of my camera crew can attest that I can get after it pretty good. But you were cruising, and I was thinking to myself, I hope I can get around half as well as you do when I have as much experience as you do, because you don't seem to have slowed down one bit, I'm guessing, from what you were doing when you were 30, is my guess. It was a good pace out there in the mountains.
Well, in my mind, I'm still 30. That's my problem. Sometimes I get going like that, and in the end of the day, walking out, I'm like, whew, I pay for it a little bit. But yes, I can. I'm thankful that I'm still able to go like I can at my age, and I can tell, like I need my rest at night. I got to rest my legs and stuff, but hey, I'll be 65 here in May, so I think I'm doing pretty good for that.
Yeah,
being that age,
I'd say so. So we ended that day having covered a bunch of ground, but never did pick up another track. And the plan was the next day I was going to go back out there on my own and bring Dylan and Jimmer with me and see if I couldn't get on another one. Now, what I want to do is this, Hal. I kind of want to walk you through what happened over the next 3 days, at least the highlights, the most important parts, and then kind of pick your brain on, did I make the right decision here? Did I make a mistake there? Would you have done something differently? I mean, as I describe some of these things, feel free to jump in, Hal, if you think I did something wrong, or if you want to, share something you might have thought differently in any of this. I'm really curious. It would have been really neat if somehow I could have had you just follow me around the next 3 days and like critique me as I went. Or maybe not even tell me in the moment, but just be taking notes. And then at the end of the day, I'd come back and we'd sit down and you would walk me through all the things I screwed up. That would have been the best. But this will have to do as a closest way to learn from what I did, right or wrong. So Dylan and Jimmer, fact check me here. If there's anything I forget to mention, if there's anything I should have expanded on, if there's anything different, feel free to jump in here as I describe at least the main points.
Deal.
So day two starts off. We start at the same beginning point, and right away, one of the first things I was not sure about was what's the route I want to take. Like, how do I how do I want to go through this huge expanse of open land that we have available in front of us? And my initial thought was, okay, I remember yesterday we had walked a lot of different country, but the very most deer sign, just tracks, seemed to be up towards the top of these ridges where there seemed to be some old cuts and more hardwoods. That just seemed to be more diverse terrain and seemed to be a lot more tracks. So I thought, let's head up to the tops of these ridges where that most sign was, and then I'll take a wide swing to the west, which would take us into new country, while most of the hiking we did the day previous had been to the east. So that was my strategy, was basically get up high where most of the sign was the day before, and then get into a new section of it. And we started hiking, just cruising, covering country, and pretty quickly, within like a half hour, we came across a track that was like a maybe track. And this was one that I looked at it, and I was thinking two things. It seemed to be a maybe on both fronts. It seemed like this could be fresh. This is probably an overnight track, I thought. But I just didn't know, like, is this a big track? Like, is this a buck track? Is this just like a good doe track? I remember thinking, like, you can see dew claws, but it's not big. And I kind of waffled on it and thought, is it big enough? I don't know. Is it super duper fresh? Not that fresh, but it's probably, it was new from when we came through there last. So it happened at least, because this was still along the trail that we'd walked the first day. So I knew it was at least from the night at some point. And ultimately, I decided, let's not walk on this first one. It just doesn't knock my socks off. Let's keep going. I'm sure we'll find something better. And what did we do, Jimmer? From there, we hiked, I think, 4 miles or something, or we hiked a bunch, and didn't come across a single other new track after that. Isn't that right? I feel like we'd put a bunch of miles on after that.
Yeah, and like you said, we went in same spot the day before with Hal, but we were definitely covering brand new ground. And that first track, we just didn't feel it and moved on from there. And from there, I think we burned a lot of footage of you just walking, just covering ground.
A lot of walking footage.
A lot of Mark walking and a lot of looking in the snow.
What's pretty funny is we got back one of these nights. I don't know if it was day 2 or what day it was, but we got back to our little cabin, and we have a producer out there with us, this guy Andreas, we all know and love. And Andreas would be waiting at camp all day for us. And then when we get home, he'd be asking us, did you talk about this? Did you see this? Did we get coverage of this? Did we make sure to get footage of Mark doing this and this, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of making sure we checked all the boxes that we want to check. And I remember one night he's like, do you guys feel like you have enough footage of Mark walking? Do we have good walking Mark footage? And I think everybody just laughed.
Terabyte of Mark walking footage.
Terabyte, yeah.
many hours of Mark walking. But I'd say the highlight of day 2 was 4 hours later or 4 miles later. It was one of the two. I remember seeing 4 on my track. I was tracking all this on Onyx. We ended up coming across a track that seemed fresh-ish enough. And at this point, we'd been walking half the day, hadn't come across anything else we wanted to track. Now I see one. I'm like, man, this is probably a buck, and this is probably somewhat fresh. We should start tracking this one. And so we end up tracking this deer, and it like looped around a couple times and went here and there and everywhere. And I remember thinking, man, this is fun. Like, I'm finally on a track on my own. I'm actually tracking one. I'm doing the thing. This is pretty cool. The previous day I was following you, Hal, and you were making the decisions, and you were analyzing the tracks and finding it when we lost it. And so I didn't have to really work in that way. But now I was actually doing all the work, doing all the thinking, picking it up when I get lost in other tracks, kind of sorting through the puzzle when you see all these different things come together and you're trying to read the story of what actually happened here and where did he go. And I'm thinking, this is great. We're going to walk down this buck and we're going to do the thing. And then it starts circling back to the west. And it keeps going more and more in the direction that we started. And I think it was maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes before we got back to the trail. And I'm thinking, this deer is going right back to where we started. And I started getting this little whisper in the back of my mind saying, what if this is the same track that you saw at the very beginning of the day? And sure enough, 20 minutes later, This deer ended up being the original track we saw at the very beginning of the day. And now I've followed his track all the way back to the beginning. I've wasted 2/3 of the day, and now I'm right back to where I started at first light and realized that this is the buck I'd passed up on, 8 hours earlier or whatever it was. Hale, what do you think about that? Because eventually we ended up following that track for a while, and then I lost it somewhere, and then that was our day. And I was kind of upset at myself that I passed on that one and now wasted the whole day, spent all this time. What do you think about how I approach that? Is that something that's ever happened to you? What do you think when you hear that?
Funny you should say that, because what you got out of that day was a lot of practice, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you got your practice in, and you learned that can happen, and it can happen to anybody, because it happened to me. I do that, shouldn't say quite often, but it happened to me again one of the days. Actually, it was the first day of muzzleloader season this year when we had the good snow. I was lucky enough, I had my cameraman with me, and I cut a track from the road where I've never cut a track before, never really seen a buck track crossing there. And it came out in the road and walked down the side of the road, dragging his feet, and I could see another mark in the road, and I go, what the heck is going on? I had to look at it. Well, there was a stick laying there. Well, when he come out of the woods, he must have come up through some brush, and he snapped a stick off in his antlers about 4 feet long, and he dragged it with his antlers down the road about 50 yards before it dropped out of his antlers. So now I'm thinking he must have a pretty decent rack to do that. And it was one of them square-toed ones. But anyways, we jumped right on it. So we got right on it at pretty much daylight. And when it went in the woods, it came to when I first got in there was another track coming back, almost like back on itself there. And in my mind, I just discounted it as being the same one, just because of the way it came back. And I don't know why. I can't think about why I did, but there was a reason that I didn't even think that it could be the same one. But I went a little bit further, and I came to a kind of an open bowl there, and another track came across, and I looked at that one, and I go, because if a track is crossing another track, you stop before it crosses, and sometimes you can see where they cross past the two tracks, which one is fresher by which way the snow is dragged into one track or the other. And it didn't drag any snow in, so I couldn't tell. But I just took a hunch. The way it went up, and I could visualize that it looped around. And it was exactly the same size track. And I said, that's the same buck, I'm pretty sure, making a loop. But in any event, it's getting out of this little spot. So I took it, and it went back across the road about a quarter of a mile above where I'd parked the truck. And it got in a completely different piece of woods. It went up through some new cuts, wandered around, followed a doe, and it headed up on this mountain. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, he's going to be up on that mountain somewhere. So he kept on it, and it went up off the end of this mountain, and it still headed in kind of a westerly direction. And then all of a sudden, it got to where there was some more deer, and it kind of turned back towards the logging road. And the next thing you know, it crossed the logging road, and there was a bunch of other deer tracks there. And it crossed, so I crossed it, and I'm about a mile. He crosses the road about a mile from the truck. And now he's headed back over in the country he was headed in the first place. So he goes over on these knobs, and he know what he's doing. He's checking all these green knobs for does. And I crossed paths with another smaller buck track in there and some does. And he kept going, and that's what he was doing. He was searching. Then he starts to swing back east. And I start thinking to myself, could this possibly be the same buck? I was thinking it might be where I crossed paths with it in that little hardwood bowl. I said, could this be the same buck there? And I go, I can't believe it would be. So I stayed on it. Next thing you know, I crossed this old, we call it a winter road, like a grassy road. And he got down and through these beaver bogs, doing the same thing, just doing his thing. But he's headed east, but he's a half a mile back in there. And all of a sudden he swings back south, and now he's making a circle. And I'm kind of saying to myself, I can't believe it is, but there's a good chance this is the same buck. And he started chasing the doe around in one place, and make a long story short, 4 hours later, just like you said, I'm right back in. I wasn't in that hardwood bowl. I was back where I discounted that first track. I hadn't been in the woods 50 yards when this other track come back across, that I completely discounted that one. The one, when I made a decision in the bowl, it was the right decision. But I didn't discount that first one, or I did discount it. Well, he had crossed the road like not even 50 yards from where he came out dragging the stick. He'd gone up in, he'd come out and went back in, made that little loop, made the whole great big loop, and was back across the road again. And it was 11 o'clock when I got back there, from 7 to 11. And he went across the stream and up on these other bluffs. And I said to myself, well, that's a good place. He's probably going to be over there anyway. Well, the time we got across the stream and got over in there, there was moose tracks and deer tracks all over his tracks, because it'd been half the day, and the moose were feeding all through there. And all I could do was I kept circling successively bigger circles to try to find his track, because it'd be completely obliterated with other tracks, between mostly moose. But there was some deer in there too, stomping around. And I finally picked up a track I thought was his, and I didn't go very far on it. It was fresh, and I see it go, but I couldn't see the head. And then I could see where it had been in there feeding and stuff, and it didn't look like. I decided it wasn't the same one. It was another one, pretty much the same size track, because this one I was on, he dragged that stick out there, and he didn't go through any narrow openings with his antlers. He'd walk around narrow stuff. And this other one I jumped he was just come through some thick stuff, feeding and stuff. I go, that ain't the same buck. And I made another big circle, over a half a mile circle, and couldn't get his track coming out. And now it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm like, I guess I'm done for the day. So same thing. It was like, you can't call it a wasted day, because you learn some things. You know what I mean? You saw some things, you learned some things, but it does happen. So you didn't do anything wrong, but it's actually quite common that they make them big circles and end up back again.
Yeah. Well, you're right about the practice thing. I definitely felt like, even while I was doing it and thinking to myself, like after we lost it, picked it up again when it looped back through, I thought, well, at least this is practice. Probably will never catch up with this deer, but just doing the thing, interpreting the tracks, following them, getting through tough spots where it disappears or gets confusing. I mean, I could definitely see how this is a skill that takes a while to develop, and doing it that day felt really good, even though we never, even came close to anything. But it did set me up a lot better for the next day.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
On day 3, had been talking to another guy in camp, and he'd mentioned he was going to go to a new area this day, and said we were welcome to follow him to drive up to this zone, and he could kind of, drive us into a general direction where he thought that'd be a good idea for us to explore, and then he would keep driving and go find an area he would walk. So we end up driving up to this general area. We get down a logging road. There had been a little fresh coating of snow overnight, and so there's actually some snow on the road. And sure enough, he stops the truck, hops out, and we look at this track, and there's a buck track and a doe track crossing the road, seemingly, relatively fresh, had to be fresh since that snow had just come overnight. And we talk about it and decide, hey, you know what, not a big track, but a buck. Let's do it. So he kept going to find a different place, and then me and Jimmer were going to get on the track, because this day I decided to bring just one cameraman because it seemed pretty impossible to pull it off with two. So Dylan, you just stayed back at camp and slept in and ate pizza and just relaxed all day, isn't that right?
Yeah, it was brutal.
But me and Jimmy were gonna get after it. So we parked the truck. We both were so excited about having a fresh buck track that we both needed to use the bathroom at the same time. So we're like, all right, you go on that side of the road, I go on this side of the road. Let's take care of that, and then let's follow this track. So it gets light, and we get on the track, and really it looked really fresh. I mean, it was like fresh powdery snow, and the track was crispy. I mean, it looked... It
had to be the freshest we'd seen since we got there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, when you said it looks like someone threw sugar down, it was that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so, right away we started walking it down, and within 15 minutes of walking, I already started thinking, do I need to be slowing down? Could this deer be right up here? And we tracked it down through an area that had been cut a decent bit, and it wasn't like they were on a tear. They were kind of milling around, and then they'd walk straight for a ways, and then they'd kind of spin around and mill. And there was different deer that kind of popped in and out a couple different times. But we came up over this ridge, and there was a valley down below, and then another ridge that came up the other side. And I remember thinking, I wouldn't be shocked if this buck was within view of this. I don't really know, but it just seems like I could be within sight of this buck already. It just seemed like we weren't very far behind at all, based on what we were seeing. I mean, the tracks weren't frozen. You're seeing the light tufts of snow that he kicked up when he drags his toe and all that kind of stuff. And sure enough, I basically slowed down a decent bit now. I was just kind of ready. and go down the ridge, drop down to the valley, follow the tracks up the other side of the ridge, and then sure enough, there's a bed on that opposite ridge. Now, there wasn't two beds. There was just one bed. And I could see the one bed, and then I could see what looked like a couple jumping, sets where the tracks showed that he jumped out of the bed, jumped again. And so I saw that and thought, okay, we probably bumped this buck. And so we decided to sit down and do our sandwich break thing. Now, this, Hal, is a question I have for you. I never did see the doe bed. So I could see doe tracks, and I saw the buck tracks, and I saw a single bed. And then I assumed that we had bumped him and did the sandwich break. But then later in the day, I started thinking, did I not bump that buck? Was that buck actually, did he lay down for a second, and then the doe kept going, and then he just jumped up to go follow the doe? And they kept on going their merry way. They didn't run a long ways after that jumping. I remember seeing the jumping tracks, and then there was a little bit of running for maybe 50 yards, maybe 100 yards. Jim, does that sound about right? Maybe.
Yeah.
And then they were back to just walking along.
Yep.
What do you
pretty
think?
quick.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Hal? Should I have taken the break like I did, or should I have kept pushing in that case?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Fair enough.
I think more than likely, if the two sets of tracks were running from there, that one of them just got laid down. The other one hadn't laid down yet. Maybe it was feeding or whatever it was doing, and you just happened to come along at that minute, before they both got laid down. That's what I'm thinking went on there.
Okay.
And in which case, taking the break was the right move. Did they just go about their business and see if it's a buck and a doe, like I said, I wouldn't have taken the break necessarily, depending on the time too. A lot of times I'm like, well, it's 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. I'm not going to take a break yet. I'm going to keep hunting here and see what happens. But sometimes I just take it because it's around 10 anyway,
Yeah. I mean, it was early. We hadn't been going for more. It was an hour or less into the day, and I saw that bump. And so I took the break, not having remembered or known about the doe with the buck being a different situation. So I just thought, okay, we bumped the deer. We got to sit down, even though we hadn't been going more than an hour. So we took the 30-minute break and then picked up the track again. And, like I said, I think we had some running tracks for 100 some yards or something like that, give or take. And then they basically were just walking again. And they were walking on a mostly straight line. They kind of did a straight shot and then a little curve. And we followed them, from that. They'd been on this ridge hill. When they left the bed, they went downhill, down into a flat, at the bottom of the valley. And they walked through a bunch of old cuttings, a couple of year old cut or something, and a bunch of piles of slash and tops and all this kind of stuff. And they basically did a long straight shot. They crossed back over the road that we drove into and started heading towards the mountain, towards a big mountain ridge that ran along the north section that we were hunting. And then they crossed a creek, went up this ridge, and then started going straight up the ridge. They go straight up the ridge. We get to what I think is 2/3 of the way up or something, and then they hook to the right. They take a hard right turn and start side hilling across the ridge. And when that happened, I thought to myself, okay, this seems like these deer were heading up the hill, and now they turned. They're going to look for somewhere to bed soon. So I started slowing down. I started thinking, I bet you any moment now we're going to come across a bed or we're going to see these deer run. At least we're getting closer to that. But we end up following this. We ended up following it side hilling for longer ways than I was expecting, without them stopping and feeding. I kept on looking for signs of them stopping and feeding. I kept looking for signs of them stopping and milling around or spinning around or changing direction that might indicate they're getting ready to bed or something. So I would say at this point I was medium pace. I wasn't creeping, but I wasn't cruising either. And what they did is they side hill for a ways, and they kind of went up a saddle and then turned, and then instead of going over the saddle and down the other side, they turned up and continued going higher up this ridge. And this is when they got into some thick green stuff. And as soon as I saw they were going to this thick green stuff, now I thought, okay, now they're definitely going to bed. Like, this looked like this had to be where they're going to bed. And I remember looking at Jimmer and saying, okay, we are going to slip into ultimate death creep mode. They can be anywhere around here. I really believe like they're up here. And just at that moment, like a little bit of a breeze started blowing, and I thought, this is perfect. Like, we couldn't have asked for better timing for this breeze to start, because I'd been worried about our sound, of course, that whole time. And it just seemed ideal. And so I kind of was holding the gun at the ready, and we just, acted as if there was a buck within 50 yards or within 100 yards. I was, taking just the slowest creeps, and I was crawling underneath branches, and we were in some really thick stuff where you couldn't see it all unless you were down on your knees and looking underneath it. And we were crawling through things, climbing over deadfalls, under deadfalls, belly crawling under branches, going through this stuff that just screamed bedding. I mean, it just absolutely every ounce of my being, all my hairs were on edge. It was just like, okay, we're going to see this deer or we're going to spook this deer, but it's happening. Now, before we go any further, Jimmer, what did you think about this part of it? When we slipped into this new mode, what were you thinking about what I was doing? What were you thinking about the situation? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're describing it completely accurate. Is it healthy to have your adrenaline that high for as long as you did that day? Yeah. I mean, we started the day off on such fresh tracks, and I felt like you said, I felt like we were 50 yards behind these deer all day. But this specific moment, I mean, especially at this time, I try to step when you step, but boy, that was some thick brush. But yeah, it just felt like this was it. We're there. They're on this nice ridge overlooking, as Hal says, looking back from where they came. It had to be that moment.
Yeah. And that kind of situation ended up lasting an hour, I think. At least an hour, if not more, because we kept on slow moving our way through this stuff, and then we'd come over a little, like every little new area I could see, every little rise we'd peek over. I kept thinking, like, we're going to peek over one of these bits, and we're going to see a bedded deer. We're going to see a back. We'll see an ear twitching. We'll see a little patch of white tail. We'll see an antler tine move in the sunlight. I just kept stopping and looking and glassing and thinking, like, anywhere here it's going to be, but we never came on them. And we kept being on the tracks, and they started doing the thing, though, that, again, they'd hooked up to the top. They came up this little knob. Now they were milling. They'd stop. You could see where they're feeding and nibbling on stuff. They were kind of spinning around, milling. You could see one of the deer would kind of loop around the other and up and down and around in this little zone. And they kept doing that for quite a ways. I mean, for at least an hour. And I don't know how much time that was or how much distance that actually was. I would bet it was at least, I don't know, a couple 100 yards of that kind of behavior that we were like slow creeping through. Don't you think? Something like that, Jim?
Yeah, and there was many moments where we just had to pause and maybe even backtrack just to keep track of where their prints were going, because they were just kind of all over the place. Yeah,
they'd loop, and then we'd be like, oh, did they just come back the way we were? And then we come back here and there. And to go from there, basically, that was like an hour-long creep fest, thinking we'd find him, and never did until we finally went several hundred yards doing that, 300 yards, I don't know, 200 yards of that, something like that. And then it kind of opened up a little bit more, and they're still going. Yeah. And it started opening up. It wasn't as thick as it had been. I was thinking, man, are they just going to keep cruising? And probably just as I started having that thought, here's a bed. Here's a big bed, and it's fresh, like very fresh. And I realized, oh, we just bumped this buck out of here. And so then I'm thinking, well, we've already done a sandwich break. Now I've just bumped this buck a second time, and right as I did that, right as we bumped that deer, a snow squall moved through, and it starts like dumping snow on us. And I remember being unsure of what to do next, because I thought, I remember the sandwich break rule, but at the same time, this is the second time. Does it count on the second time or not? I couldn't remember that. And the second thing I thought is, man, if this snow squall keeps on going at this rate, will I lose the tracks? So I was torn. Should I sit? Should I keep going? Do I sit for a little while and then keep going? What I ended up doing was we ended up stopping and we took a short break, like a 15-minute break, and then we picked it back up. Hal, what do you think about that piece of what we were doing there? Both my death creep mode there, and then secondly, my decision when it came to that second bump.
Yeah, well, obviously you knew you had an idea he might be laying in there, and he was. So that worked for you. You didn't see him, but it worked for you anyway. And then I wouldn't, because I don't, like I said, I only stopped, take a break the first time. So I wouldn't have done that, plus combined with the fact that it was snow squall, and I'd have used the snow squall as my buck killing time. You know what I mean? It helps you out, with it blowing around the snow and stuff,
Yeah, that makes sense. Jimmer, why didn't you tell me to do
that? Just kicking myself right now.
Yeah, could have used that nudge. I
needed the standards break, so
yeah, it was good to have that break, because that was really, that hour or two of creep mode. That was excruciating, the level of attention to detail I was trying to put into our movements there. That was the sneakiest I've ever tried to be, probably, for as long of a period of time, and moving as slowly in like thick cover like that I can remember. I really thought like this is going to be our one chance. This is it. But that didn't happen. So we ended up getting back on the trail and trying to cover ground again. I remember seeing running tracks for a while. We could still follow it, even though it was snowing. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, he knows we're on him. This is the second time we bumped him. He's moving. And I kept thinking to myself, man, what would Hal do in this situation? I couldn't remember getting to this point in our conversations with you, Hal. We talked about if you bump a deer once. I didn't really know, what do you do when you bump a buck twice or three times? Like, how's this deer? Is this deer ever going to slow down and chill out? Or is he just going to be really on edge the whole time and I'll never be able to catch up to him? But I thought to myself, okay, we bumped him twice. I'm just going to push him at this point and try to get lucky. And so I was like, I need to cover ground, take advantage of the snow, and not lose the track. So we started moving faster at this point, like right back up to like full speed probably. And he went running down. If I remember right, he went running side hill on the ridge and then started going down the ridge and then side hilling more. And then he turned to go back down the hill and then looped slightly. It was downhill, and then he started curving to the right, and then boom, there's another bed. And he was out of that bed. And you could, this was as fresh as you could possibly. I could still see like hair marks from where his tail had been laying in the snow. You could see like that level of detail. Right. So now I bumped him 3 times, and now I kind of feel like, is this a lost cause? This buck's just running and running. And so we keep going, and I just look back at Jim and I just said, man, we'll probably never see this buck, but we're just going to run him down, and we're just going to go and go and go. And I remember saying something like this reminded me of, I don't know if you've heard these stories, Hal, but there's talk of some like tribes in Africa and different parts of the world where they have historically done something called persistence hunting, where they would just run after an antelope or something, and they would run for hours and hours and hours and hours, and eventually humans actually have an endurance advantage over a lot of animals that can't cool as well as we can in the middle of an event like that, and they would actually be able to run an animal to exhaustion and then be able to spear it or something like that. And I remember thinking, am I going to try to do a persistence hunt on this buck and just keep going and going and going? And I mean, Jim, I remember I stopped at one point and you looked at me like, dude, you're just running in the woods.
And it wasn't weren't his tracks pretty, like he was speeding up quite a bit at this point.
I mean, he was basically kept on running, and then I was like, well, we needed to keep moving. So I was just going as quickly as I could through the woods, just on him, and we just went and went and went and went. And in my head, I thought, like, we're never going to see this deer. Like he knows we're behind us. And this was my next point of indecision, where I was like, okay, we've bumped him 3 times. I don't see any, I just couldn't imagine a scenario in which we could kill this deer. And I kept wondering, is the way to go to just keep going and going and going and hope to get lucky, and like I'll just happen to come over a hill one time a little bit faster than he expects and I get a sight of him? Like, do I need to hope for that luck? Or is there some other trick that Hal does, that I don't know about yet that would allow me to get on this deer. I remember reading about you doing like a loop around trick, Hal, where sometimes you'll loop around ahead of a buck. And I was trying to think, what's the scenario that I would do that? How could I loop around and try to get ahead of this deer? Do I know this area well enough? And I just couldn't think through a way to do it in a way that would actually be useful without just being like a Hail Mary in the dark. So we just walked and walked and walked until finally it was almost the end of the day. My question to you, Hal, is after that third bump and this indecision I had at that moment, how would you have handled that? Is there any other trick in your bag of tools that you would have pulled out at this point, or is it just keep walking and hope to get lucky, or is there something else?
Well, there's two kinds of deer habits that they do. Once in a while, I figure it's probably 1 out of 10. You'll get these bucks. I call them runners. And they will do that from the time you jump them the first time. But this one wasn't like that. So it's a little different situation. But sometimes you get a runner, and that's how he learned how to escape a coyote, was he'd run for a mile and then just lay down and watch his track again. And if you jumped him again, he'd run another mile. Those bucks there are nearly impossible to kill on the track, because they might just drop right in their track somewhere. They might run across an opening and just drop down and watch. So you never get an indication of where that they might be laying down. You never get that, because they run and stop and lay down. It's almost impossible to kill those bucks like that, tracking them. But you just got this buck frightened because you jumped him out of his bed again. And you usually, by running after him like that, you're not going to get him that way usually, because they just wait when they see movement coming. Now they're not even going to let you do anything. When they see movement coming, they just take off again and keep going. On those, all I try to do on those is I just try to go. It depends what they're doing. When they run, if they're running, and they're usually that buck, if he runs, slows down, starts walking again, he's going to wait and look again. That's just almost always what they do. They're going to keep watching because they're alerted to something's after them. But all I'm doing is hoping that he makes the mistake once and stops in a place where I can see him first. So I don't run after him, because I'm more looking a lot more now. Not that I don't like slow down to a creep, but I just go along. If he's running, I move along. Once he stops running again, I start going easy again, because I know he's going to be there looking somewhere. And I'm just hoping I can catch him in the right place. And I guess a good example that you can see of that, or anybody can, is on my Brutus film there on YouTube. That's all I did with that buck. Was I finally got his MO, what he would do. He would run, but he didn't run that far, and then he'd walk. And then when he'd be like quick walking, and then when he would start dragging his feet, that meant he was going to lay down. Took me a little bit to figure that out, but every time he'd drag his feet, he'd be laying there pretty close, watching back. So when I finally shot him, he had run down off this ridge for quite a ways. He just wanted to get out of there because I just shot at him. And he crossed the road again, the gravel road, and got down into some kind of mixed growth, some green and stuff. And then it got into kind of a thick thing, and then he started dragging his feet. So I said, he's going to be laying here somewhere. So I just started going easy, and he kind of cleared up the end of this. He was in a little skidder trail, and then he turned abruptly to the left, and I didn't step out. I stopped, and I just kind of peeked through the limbs of the spruce trees there, and I could see him laying there looking back about 35, 40 yards, maybe 35 yards. and I just got my foot swung around and let him have it laying in his bed there. So if I'd have stepped out, I was just hurrying too much, he'd have just jumped up and took off again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what you call catching him looking. You know, he was looking, but I just I anticipated that, and I saw him first, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely there's a certain artistry to knowing how to handle these different moments, these like inflection points within a track job, it feels like. You know, like what to do when you catch up, what to do when you see these different behaviors, how to handle different conditions. I mean, there's all these different little variables that I suppose just with time and experience, you develop an intuition for how to deal with it. And, you know, having not done it before, I guess I don't feel too bad that I didn't know some of these things, but I do feel like every one of these experiences you get will certainly change how you approach the next one. I could just see that even day after day. Like each day I'd go along and be like, okay, I better know how to deal with this. I kind of get what I'm seeing here. I understand this part. You could see that rapid accumulation of information happening real time.
Yeah, and then the other thing you always got to remember, though, is they're all individuals, and they don't all do the exact same thing. So
right.
You got to try to key in on what your buck that day is doing. What is a little thing that he might do that's different, that clues you to how you can react to that.
Yeah, it's a great.
I had one of my books. I had a story in about this buck that for some reason, when he was going to lay down, he would abruptly turn off his track and take a couple of jumps, and then go lay down. So I just keyed in on that, and I didn't end up shooting that buck. I knew he was laying down, and I circled this piece of woods that he was in, and he didn't come out, so I knew he was laying there, but I didn't have enough time to go back and hunt it. I mean, I didn't say go back, I was there, but I didn't have time to do what it would have taken to get him because it was too late. It was 3:00 in the afternoon. I had an hour I had about 5 miles to get out of there, and I had about an hour left of daylight, so it was another one of them long walks out in the dark.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it seems like you could do this for nearly a lifetime and still sometimes be surprised by things and find something new. And I think that's what I liked about it, having done it, tried it, and we're running out of time, so I'm gonna really fast forward through stuff because I didn't anticipate this taking as much time as it has. But you know, that day didn't catch up to that buck. Went out the next day, didn't find a track until the last couple hours. Followed one, never took us anywhere really, and that was it. You know, we did it. We gave it a good shot. I had a couple tracks to follow. I had one really good one that, you know, I thought we could have pulled it off. So it was really cool to be on that one and to be that in the moment and feeling like he could be just ahead of us at any moment. That was absolute high point. Never did see one though. And that was the trip. I remember one main thing at the end of it was that this one left me with like a I don't want to say like an itch that I wanted to scratch, but like a clawing desire to get back and pull it off. Was basically like this one. I didn't want this idea of this type of hunting to defeat me. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to say, but I wanted to figure out some way to do it. So yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna be trying this thing again in one way or another. Really quick, we just have a couple minutes before I actually have to run too. But Dylan, final thoughts or impressions after having gone through all this and seeing this yourself, real quick.
I think I'm in the same boat as you in that I really want to see success in doing this. You know, whether that's behind the camera or, you know, someday getting to do it on my own. But, you know, just that feeling of following an animal and feeling like you know it by the end. You know, you follow it for so long, you feel like you know its habits. to catch up to it and finalize, close on it, I think is something that I look forward to trying again in the future.
Yeah. What about you, Jimmer?
I thought it was fascinating how fast time actually went. I mean, from first light to last, you're so involved in this mystery, like Dylan says, learning the patterns of this deer. You probably got only this day, this amount of light to figure out this person or this deer, this personality of this deer. It's just amazing how fast the time went, because all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, we're an hour till sundown, and it still feels like we are 50 yards from this deer.
Yeah, that was something.
Yeah.
Hal, I just want to reiterate again what we said when we were down there with you, and I'll say to you every time I see you again, which is just thank you. Can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time to walk around with us out there, to show us what you do, to teach us your ways. It was an absolute blast. And I guess I want to give you an opportunity here for people that want to learn more from you, who want to participate in your classes or read your books or watch your videos or anything. Where should they go to find that stuff and to get more information?
Well, you can find everything really at bigwoodsbucks.com, and they want to watch any of the films on YouTube. It's the Big Woods Bucks YouTube channel. The outfitter part of it, the hunts are on the same website. Big Woods Bucks is just as an outfitter tab there, and that has the classes on it too. I do those in the spring. They're actually all booked for next spring, but I'm just starting to book the hunts for next fall. I'm getting the return people booked in, then whatever I have for openings, I'll fill in with new people and go from there. So, but yeah, it's just a different way to do things. And like I said, I tell everybody it's a way of hunting. You either love the big woods or you hate it. There doesn't seem to be any in between. But I ended up loving it when I first started doing it 40 some odd years ago, and going to hunt somewhere else now is, like in rural or farm country, I just can't seem to do it,
Well, I'm starting to understand where you're coming from, Hal, and I hope that we can get on and do another one of these episodes next year or 2 years from now or whenever it is someday to talk through my first successful track. I'm counting on having that conversation with you someday down the road soon, Hal.
Sounds good.
All right. Hal,
looking forward to it.
Dylan, Jimmy, everybody, thanks so much for joining me for this one, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that is today's episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you for tuning in. If you're still hunting, best of luck out there. Have some fun, eat some venison, and until next time, stay wired to hunt.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my Maine turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.